As word of the Argentine defeat leaked out in Buenos Aires, thousands of demonstrators began to gather outside the presidential palace. President Galtieri was scheduled to make a speech trying to explain the Falkland developments. But the demonstrators, as many as 5,000 of them, began screaming, "Traitor, traitor," and this is the end of the military dictatorship. Police moved in with clubs and tear gas. They dispersed the crowd. Some television crew members were knocked to the ground. Earlier in the day, when the crowd was smaller, the question was the same. Will the junta last? And if so, for how long? Bob Schieffer is in the Argentine capital.
Although they generally numbered no more than 1,000 people at any one time, there were demonstrators around the presidential palace most of the day, and they were looking for someone to blame for the British victory. Many were angry with the ruling military junta and shouted, "Out with the traitors." Increased tension replaced the stunned silence with which most Argentines received the news of the ceasefire yesterday, as what little information Argentina has released about the battle got around. There were arrests throughout the day. The police threatened to use tear gas at one point. Several North American television crews were jostled. A Canadian crew found their car surrounded by demonstrators who kicked and rocked it. An ABC camera team's car was stoned before the crew escaped. The government, too, began its own search for scapegoats. The Navy newspaper Convicción left no doubt where that search centered. In a front-page editorial, it referred to U.S. support for Britain as treachery and said the battle for the islands had been lost because we were beaten by two world superpowers that had to join together to defeat us. Argentina's Foreign Minister Costa Mendes picked up the line, telling reporters the British success was because of U.S. support. Sources with contacts in the Argentine government told CBS News tonight the hunt for a scapegoat underscores the intense political strain being put on the three-member ruling military junta by the battlefield losses. These sources said they considered it only a matter of time until military President Galtieri is forced out. And they said the entire junta may be swept away if additional details about the fighting and what is eventually done with the Argentine soldiers on the island is seen here as a humiliation. If that happens, says one source, the whole country may come unglued, and who knows what kind of government will come out of that. Bob Schieffer, CBS News, Buenos Aires.
CBS News will present a special report on the end of the Falklands War and other developments tonight at 11:30, 10:30 Central Time.
This is a CBS News special report. Winners and losers. Reporting from New York, here is CBS News correspondent Dan Rather.
Good evening. The fighting in the Falklands is over, but there is new fighting now on the streets of Buenos Aires. And tonight there are signs that the last casualty of the Falklands War could be the Argentine military junta. In Buenos Aires, angry protesters gathered outside the gates of the presidential palace in the biggest anti-government demonstration in years. Later, President Leopoldo Galtieri went on national television to try to explain why Argentina lost and to ask support for his government. It was 74 days ago that Argentina invaded the Falklands. From the beginning, it was called an unlikely war in an improbable place, a war fought over old-fashioned principles. It was a war which gave us new place names, Goose Green and Port San Carlos, and new weapons, Exocet missiles and jump jets. And it gave us winners and losers. The biggest loser, the Argentine government, which started a war and failed to win it, and which tonight on the streets of Buenos Aires did battle with its own people. Eric Ingberg reports.
The government had urged the people to turn out for General Leopoldo Galtieri's first post-war appearance. He never made it. The crowd came to the presidential palace, but angrily, in no mood to listen. There were 10,000 in the square, many chanting for an end to the military government. Coins were hurled at police and at the Argentine press. Some in the crowd screamed that lies had been told repeatedly about progress in the war. There were arrests and beatings. Then, with guns that fired tear gas and plastic bullets, the police opened fire. It is not known how many were hurt, but witnesses reported at least some serious injury. The Argentine news media, closely watched by the government, downplayed the violence. And none of these pictures has been shown as yet to the Argentine people.
Police sirens could still be heard in Buenos Aires later in the evening when President Galtieri went on nationwide television. And he had a scapegoat of his own to blame for the battle losses, the United States, which he called the surprise enemy of the Argentine people. Galtieri did not mention the rioting that had prevented him from making an appearance on the balcony of the presidential palace, but he said sooner or later Argentina would get the islands, and anyone who tried to take advantage of the recent defeat would be considered a traitor. When Galtieri and the other members of the ruling military junta appeared together last week during the Pope's visit, they seemed on edge. And from the beginning of the crisis, few here thought the junta could survive intact a military defeat. Tonight's demonstrations underscored the government's fragility. Air Force Commander Basilio La Mendoza has emerged as something of a hero because the Air Force inflicted heavy damage on the British fleet, and he is now considered the most likely to retain a powerful position in the future. But sources with contacts inside the Argentine government told CBS News before tonight's riots that they considered it only a matter of time until Galtieri was forced out. The sources said the third member of the junta, Navy Commander Jorge Anayas, has also seen his power diminished considerably because of the Navy's poor showing. If the current government does fall, analysts are not sure what will emerge in its place, but say it will most likely contain strong anti-U.S. elements. Even politicians such as Peronist Tomas Manuel Anchorena, who were thrown out of the government by the military regime, agree with the military that the anti-U.S. feeling is strong.
I'd say the position of the states is viewed very, very negatively, and what costs years and years of effort to the states and to the friends of the states in Latin America is now completely reversed.
The military took power in 1976, promising to cure the economic problems that had plunged the country into chaos. It was never able to cure the economic problems. The war has made them worse, and now that the generals have suffered a military defeat, tonight's rioting suggests that the government may be on the verge of ending in the same kind of chaos that brought it to power. Bob Schieffer, CBS News, Buenos Aires.
The worst riots in Argentina since the military seized power in 1976 erupted last night in Buenos Aires as angry mobs besieged the presidential palace and shouted that the military junta has to go. As Charles Gomez reports, Argentina's defeat in the Falklands may have been the beginning of the end for the Galtieri regime.
It was hardly what the military government had in mind when it invited Argentines to the Plaza de Mayo to hear President Leopoldo Galtieri address them from the government house. What was intended as a rally of support quickly erupted into angry denunciations of Galtieri and his commanders for losing the Falklands. They chanted, "It's over. The military dictatorship will end," screamed traitor, and dared the president to come to the balcony. Galtieri quickly canceled his advertised appearance. As the mob grew to 10,000, they broke through police lines, pelting officers with coins and garbage. The police responded using tear gas guns and shotguns firing plastic bullets. An unknown number of demonstrators were injured, unknown because of a virtual news blackout in Buenos Aires. The Argentine news media recorded the chaos, providing a minute-by-minute account of the demonstration. But the pictures and the report were not shown on government-censored television stations. An hour later, Galtieri appeared in a broadcast address, making no mention of the demonstration and blaming the United States and its backing of Great Britain for the loss of the Falklands. As Galtieri spoke, police cordoned off the riot area, restoring an uneasy calm. But with underlying problems unresolved, no one here was predicting how long that calm would last. Charles Gomez, CBS News, Buenos Aires.
In his speech, Galtieri remained as defiant as ever, never mentioning the word surrender and vowing that sooner or later the Falklands will be Argentina's. But Galtieri stopped short of threatening to resume the war from the Argentine mainland. The general repeatedly praised the battle waged by Argentine soldiers and bitterly denounced the U.S. for its support of Great Britain. Even though Britain has won the war, it's still not very certain if they've won a peace. Prime Minister Thatcher continues to press the junta to declare that all hostilities in the South Atlantic have ended, a point not covered in the surrender agreement. The Prime Minister says that some of the 15,000 Argentine prisoners on the islands will be held until the junta agrees to a peace declaration. Mrs. Thatcher also made it clear that she has no intention of permitting any future Argentine role in the Falklands. The Prime Minister also ruled out any role for the UN in the island's future.
Major General Jeremy Moore, who commands British troops in the Falklands, said today that the Argentine regulars fought very well. But Moore said the majority of the Argentine soldiers, the young conscripts, didn't want to be there, and he said some of those conscripts couldn't have left their trenches if they had to. He said their own officers apparently had shot them in both feet. More British casualties from the war are one step closer to home tonight, even as the Argentine leaders who seized the Falklands 2 months ago seem to be hanging on to their jobs by a thread. Eric Ingberg has the first of our 2 reports.
61 more British soldiers and sailors injured near the end of the war came through the port of Montevideo today. Most had suffered burns when Argentine planes bombed a transport ship. They'll soon be home. In these pictures, obtained exclusively by CBS News, Argentine troops near Stanley are posing for a photographer last weekend. Then, posing gives way to scrambling. A rocket has hit near them. They believe it came from a British plane.
They use only this.
Officials of the International Red Cross were in Stanley in the war's final days, seeking to minimize carnage among civilians. Nevertheless, this home owned by a Stanley resident was destroyed Friday, Argentina says, by fire from British ships. 2 civilians died. As the British prepared for the final assault, Argentine wounded were evacuated from Stanley. The final battleground outside the town offered little cover for troops. British artillery was effective, cratering the landscape so thoroughly that the defenders had to disperse ammunition and other supplies. This army depot fell prey to a British helicopter assault. Argentine troops at an anti-aircraft emplacement can see a British helicopter firing in the hills, but they can't hit it. The contrails are those of Harriers over Stanley. The Argentines had some air defense missiles, but not enough to win control of the air, a crucial factor in the war's outcome. In this one instance, however, the ground crew firing an Argentine missile claimed a hit, saying that distant puff of smoke is a British jet after its destruction. Eric Ingberg, CBS News, Buenos Aires.
A change in the ruling military junta is now expected within days rather than weeks, according to authoritative sources with contacts in the upper levels of the Argentine military command. These sources told CBS News that senior officers are now discussing the possibility of asking Army Commander Galtieri to step aside as president of Argentina to be replaced by a civilian appointed by the military. Significantly, as these developments unfolded, Galtieri was holding a private meeting with his Army commanders as the other members of the junta, Navy Commander Jorge Anaya and Air Force Commander Basilio Lamidoso, were each holding private sessions with their top officers. Lamidoso, whose planes inflicted the heaviest damage on the British, is favored by some factions to replace Galtieri. Hostile comments about the junta were heard again today on the streets, and one person with ties to the government said, if the junta does not give an explanation soon of what happened on the islands, the violence that began last night will be just the beginning. Bob Schieffer, CBS News, Buenos Aires.